Hello, second graders. We're going to read some more Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle today. Now, this chapter, chapter 7, is really, really long, and it's actually going to be broken up into 6 different parts. So, stick with me. I know for some reason, this author likes to write really long chapters. That's okay, because there's a lot to say. So, this chapter is chapter 7, The Never Want to Go to Schooler. Ooh, interested about this. 7:30. Time to get up, called Mrs. Jones loudly and cheerfully from the foot of her stairs. Julie and Linda jumped out of bed and began to race, getting dressed. From Jody and Jan's room, there was the sound of one person getting up and loud groans. I feel terrible, groaned Jody from the upper bunk. Aw, said Jan, you don't look, you just don't want to go to school. You did the same thing last week. Groaned and moaned and felt sick until the rest of us left for school, and then you felt fine. Oh, is that so? And how do you know so much, Dr. Jones? Said Jody, leaning out of the upper bunk and forgetting to groan. I know, said Jan, as he tied up his shoes, because somebody was using my toolbox while I was at school. Somebody who nicked and chiseled and left the hammer out on the sidewalk by the maple tree. Jody said, I was fixing the treehouse and I did not nick your old chisel. Dick Thompson named it, and you know he did. Dick Thompson nicked it, and you know he did. Jan said, Dick nicked it just a little. Now it has a bigger nick in it. I measured. Jody said, when I'm 10 and get my own toolbox, I won't even let you walk past it. I'll never even let you see inside. There was a sound of brisk footsteps on the stairs. Jody threw himself back in bed and began to groan. Mrs. Jones appeared in the doorway. She said, I have made waffles for breakfast this morning. Hurry, boys. Jan said, I'm all ready as soon as I wash my face and hands. Old pretendy sick Jody is groaning it up in the upper bunk, so he won't have to go to school. Mrs. Jones walked over to the bunk, reached up and felt Jody's forehead. She said, You haven't a speck of a temperature, Jody, so stop playing possum and get up. Jody groaned loudly and agonizingly. He said, My stomach hurts awful. It feels like I swallowed 10 knives. Jones looked worried and said, Where does it hurt, dear? Jody said, Oh, all over my stomach. Jan called from the bathroom where he was splashing tiny bits of water on his face. Don't believe him, Mom. He was all right a minute ago. Mrs. Jones said, Jody Jones, get out of that bunk this instant. If you are sick, I just want a good look at you. Jody sat up and then crumpled in apparent agony. Oh, he moaned. My stomach is killing me. Mrs. Jones climbed partway up the little ladder that led to the upper bunk and peered anxiously at her 8-year-old son. His eyes were closed, and in the reflected light of the ceiling, he appeared pale. Mrs. Jones patted him on the shoulder and said, Just lie here quietly, Jody, until I get the older children off to school, and then I'll bring you some tea. Then she went downstairs and told Mr. Jones she thought that they ought to call the doctor. Mr. Jones said, Perhaps you had. But Jan said, Oh, Mom, don't be dumb. There's nothing wrong with Jody at all. You know never to call your mom dumb, right? Never. This is an old book. We'd never do that. Just a minute ago, he was leaning over the bunk talking to me about my tools. He stayed home yesterday and the day before, and he's getting so ignorant I don't even like to play with him anymore. 12-year-old Julie said, Miss Robinson asked me about Jody yesterday, and I told her that we thought he had an anemic dysentery. Mrs. Jones said, Where in the world did you hear something like that? Well, we're studying about it in hygiene, said Julie, and I personally think Jody has all the symptoms. Personally, I think Jody has hydrophobia kleptomania, said Mrs. Jones. Really? Or said Mr. Jones. Really? Said Julie. What are the symptoms for that? Pain in all the cartilage and slight stiffening of the esophagus, said Mr. Jones solemnly, buttering his waffle. Is Jody going to die? Wailed Linda, who was only 5 and didn't know what they were talking about. Of course not, said Mrs. Jones. Now hurry with breakfast or you'll be late for school. After the children left for school, Mr. Jones had gone to the office. Mrs. Jones carried the tray up to Jody. On it was a pot of tea, 2 poached eggs, and 3 pieces of toast. Between groans, Jody ate up every crumb. At exactly 9:02, he came pattering down to the kitchen in his pajamas and announced that he felt a tiny bit better and thought he'd go outside for a bit of fresh air. Mrs. Jones looked at him suspiciously, but he widened his large eyes, and he was only 8 years old, a little small for his age, and seemed even smaller in a 10-year-old Jan's pajamas, which he had swiped the night before because he had forgotten that he'd stuffed his own in the window seat when he was cleaning up half of his room. Mrs. Jones convinced him that he wasn't fooling and let him go out and play. All right, so we'll see what happens with Jan and his never want to go to school or attitude. See you next time.